Hello everyone, how have you been? I'm Ari Thurger and today I'm going to talk about Herodias, the first witch. I know this video came out in December, probably, and I'm still talking about witches, but I recorded this video during October, so joke's on you, I'm still in the past enjoying the season of the witch. Bloody hell. Hello there. I see you are still around. Anyway, the reason I wanted to make this video and present it to you during December is because my next video will more or less be linked to this one, and you will understand why in the near future. You see, Herodias was the most famous witch during the Middle Ages, and especially during the 10th century, Christians wrote extensively about witches and their night rides across the sky, especially Frankish Christians. The classical Roman goddess Diana, goddess of the hunt, was perceived to be the general goddess of the pagans within the medieval Christian mentality. It was said Diana guided witches across the sky, and the leader of the witches alongside Diana was Herodias, the most famous witch, a witch from the biblical sources. But in Northern Europe, there was another goddess perceived to be the goddess of the Nordic witches. And that goddess, which I'm not going to speak about her on this video, I will speak about her on the next video, was equated with both Diana and Herodias. So, this is why I wanted to make a video about Herodias, because indeed she was the most famous witch and the first of all witches, in the sense that the first witch in literature was Herodias. So she was indeed very important and quite famous during the Middle Ages, and the witch of all witches, alongside Diana and the other Nordic goddess of witches. The point here is that Herodias is always present in medieval literature when referring to witches and their doings. So, with no more delay, let's start this short Sunday video, and I do hope you enjoy it. Throughout history, there has been a ton of written records about witches, and with certainty before a writing system was invented, there were a lot of witches too, or at least the kind of people we so label as being a witch. The figure of the wise woman exists since primordial times. But one of the very first written records of a witch might have been indeed the case of Herodias, of whom I am about to speak. Herodias was the daughter of Aristobulus, to be more precise, Aristobulus IV, Prince of Judea, Herod the Great's son, who was executed around 7 BC for offending the king himself, presumably. Herodias was left an orphan, and Herod the Great engaged her to marry his other son, who was also called Herod, in an attempt to compensate her for killing her father. All was well for the time, including their marriage, until Herod II was no longer in his father's favor. As such, Herodias then divorced her husband and married a more favored son of Herod the Great, called Herod Antipas. One of those condemning the new marriage was John the Baptist, a well-known character from the Gospels, who had just paid a visit to the palace to reveal the new Messiah was coming, yet to be born. Herodias was a cunning woman. She had outmaneuvered kings to get what she wanted, so she would not dare to be judged by some messenger and a Messiah no one knew and wasn't even born yet. John the Baptist was marked by her. Herodias had a grown daughter from her marriage with Herod II, whose name is confusing but comes down to us as Salome. According to the Bible, she was the archetypal seductress and snared John the Baptist after dancing the dance of the 7 veils in his presence. Well, in truth, she was between the age of 17 and 22, and her acts may have been more innocent than the Bible describes, because, as you know, the Bible greatly disapproves of women, and that mentality continued on until quite late in human history. And women are either witches and workers of evil, or very seductive, just to catch men and do them harm because they are witches. Men are always caught in women's seductive attempts, because if blood is flowing elsewhere, it's not flowing up here, and man can't properly think. Moving on. Salome, after dancing, it was not only John who was stricken with by Salome, but also Herod Antipas, her stepfather and half-uncle. In fact, so besotted was Herod that he offered Salome anything she wished for. Following the counsel of her mother, Herodias, who saw in this her chance of revenge on John the Baptist, Salome asked for the prophet's head on a plate. Herod obliged, and well, you might find this a strange tale from other versions of the Bible about this account, but that's because during time and during the medieval ages, a new twist and a much stranger one was added to the gospel accounts. Obviously, you didn't expect to read the original accounts of the Bible nowadays, did you? It just doesn't enter in our modern world views, and the church knows that perfectly well, so it had to be altered, or no one would take it seriously, and you will understand why. The Bible, obviously, has been altered for centuries for the purpose of political and religious orders. And still today, it's being altered, and miraculously, some new stuff appears. Nevertheless, in the 12th century, Herodias becomes one with Salome. And it is said that she asked to see John's head as it lay on a plate. The head was presented on a plate, and as she took sight of it, the head repelled her with its breath. So strong was this ghostly wind that Herodias was carried high into the air and then blown through a hole in the roof. The wrath of John the Baptist followed, and Herodias was condemned to what Spanish medieval texts call la danza aérea, or the aerial dance. So yes, in truth, John the Baptist was not dead, even though he was beheaded. Not just a miracle, but even being dead, the power of God was still with him. He was a holy man after all, so even without his head, he was able to repel the evil witch Herodias. Since Herodias had engineered the execution of a key figure in early Christianity, she was already recognized as being an anti-Christian. But her reputation got darker still as people began referring to her as a witch. Her aerial dance became a nighttime phenomenon, and Herodias ushered in the belief that witches fly. Not only that, but she could draw out others to join her dance. And during the 13th century, Jean de Meung, one of the most important French poets of the Middle Ages, the author of Le Roman de la Rose, the Romance of the Rose, he explains, or rather he writes, that up a third of the population rode out with Herodias, now confusingly called Dame à Bond, and people rode with her for 3 nights every week. Interestingly, Jean de Meung implies that only people's souls rode out with Herodias, commenting that their bodies remain in bed, adding a note of skepticism. He adds that their senses deceive them and they only believe they are witches wandering the night. So, this is where the origins of witches riding across the skies in medieval literature comes from. Some medieval writers tell of Herodias as the witch ruler who sits in judgment over her devotees. Some are rewarded, others punished, and there are also records that Herodias and her followers devour babies, coming to the conclusion that they are night demons and muses, and only women and simple-minded men would follow Herodias. See this here, the church equating women with simple-minded men. Always this sense of inferiority. In more recent times, by the end of the 19th century, there is a new account of a witch named Herodias, reputedly the firstborn witch. She is equated with Herodias. Indeed, Herodias is mentioned as a witch goddess in many Italian witch trials transcripts. Herodias got very famous during the Middle Ages, and because of such tales around her name, women and also some men and children who were seen to practice something odd to the society standards of that time and to go off the path the political and religious orders wanted people to follow, such people were seen as witches, demons, and persecution to those people started. Nowadays, Herodias is not as famous as she was during the Middle Ages, and as far as I know, no one ever mentions her name, not even in the New Age pagan circles. But when studying the history of witchcraft and the figure of the witch, you will certainly come about Herodias. And in many medieval scriptures and texts, you will often find some pagan goddesses associated with Herodias. So now you know who Herodias was and her impact upon the medieval minds. Herodias was the first witch to be recorded, and all the stories concocted around her figure gave rise to many traits and aspects we recognize in the figure of the witch, such as flying in the air, not with a broom, that came later, but simply flying. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I hope it will be useful when studying the figure of the witch during the Middle Ages and comparing the figure of the witch and Herodias to the so-called goddesses of witches during the Middle Ages in Northern Europe and other parts of Europe, perceived by Christians. Thank you so much for watching, see you on the next video, and as always, tack för idag.